Welcome to Ray Reads, a podcast where I discuss the books I am currently reading. For this episode of Ray Reads, I will be discussing The Grapes of Wrath, an American classic by John Steinbeck. I am going to give you a fair warning now. A good portion of this episode will be my rant against capitalism. In fact, I might as well start with that and get it out of the way. To be frank, I hate American capitalism. I appreciate the anti-capitalist message in this book. But even I have to admit that Steinbeck can be heavy-handed and overly didactic. I agree with most of his points, yet the repetition made me feel as though I was being hit over the head with it. It seems that Steinbeck did not trust his readers to glean the true meaning of his story. He was afraid of going the subtle route and found safety in being as obvious as possible. This story illustrates the death of the old American dream, this fantasy that anyone who works hard can achieve all of his desires and rise to the top. This concept is simply naive. The book takes place in the 1930s, during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. Clearly, this was not a good time to be a small farmer. The crops were poor, the farmers could not pay back their debts, and so the banks seized the land for themselves and evicted all of the struggling families. The displaced families were forced to sell everything they could in order to move out to the Golden West, to California. The land of promise and opportunity turned out to be a sham. Families like the Joads struggled to find work and decent places to live. It was as though the entire state had been corrupted by capitalism. Everybody hated and abused the poor migrants. The landowners paid their workers poverty wages and greedily pocketed all the profits. The capitalist system was a failure because it prioritized profits over people. The poor working class became a commodity to be used and discarded at whim. Thus, the heroes of this tale are anti-capitalist figures. The former preacher, Jim Casey, finds his new calling from his reflections in a California jailhouse. There, he pieced together the fact that change is only possible when the people come together and demand it. A lone voice is not enough to inspire change. So, Casey then transformed into a union leader, and this is what gets him killed. He becomes a martyr before Tom Joad, inspiring his friend to follow his path. The ultimate anti-capitalist figure here is the nameless Ma Joad. While Casey and Tom are mostly shown preaching anti-capitalist sentiment, Ma Joad practiced it throughout the novel from the very moment she seized power and instated herself as the new head of the Joad family. As a woman, Ma Joad was immune to the illusion of the American dream. Her instincts were spot on, and she was the first to question whether California was actually all it was cracked up to be. Ma Joad was the only one in the family with their head on straight. While all of the men were eager to break out on their own to make money, Ma Joad insisted on keeping the family as whole as possible. This concept of placing the needs of the whole over the wants of an individual is directly anti-capitalist. Every one of her actions, from her sharing the meager stew with the starving children in the Hooverville, to the influence she exerted upon her daughter Rose of Sharon and others. All of it defines her as an anti-capitalist figure. Ma Joad was my favorite character, and I think it is a shame that she was never named in the novel. She's just Ma. The first time I read this book, in high school, I hated Rose of Sharon. I thought she was simply so annoying. The ending with her breastfeeding that dying old man haunted me for years afterward. This time around, I was more sympathetic to the girl. She had these big, naive dreams for a new life in California. She believed that her husband, Connie, would effortlessly provide a luxurious home. While I don't hate Rose of Sharon now, I still do not like her very much. Her secretive little smiles annoy me for no good reason. I simply cannot express how much I hated her iconic smile at the very end while she breastfeeds the old man. I know that this ending is supposed to be all symbolic and hopeful, but I just don't buy into it. Mere breast milk is not going to save this man from death's door. And even if it magically did do so, this act of saving a dying man cannot make up for the loss of her baby. It is really sad that Rose of Sharon is not granted any time to grieve her loss. Losing a baby like this is one of the most depressing things I can imagine. I wish that the book would have ended with the scene where Uncle John takes the baby's corpse and sends it down the flooded waters for the public to later discover. In my opinion, this act is the absolute most notable in this story. So many poor migrant children died from malnourishment at this time. The interchapters of the novel discuss how food that couldn't be sold for a profit was wasted, just thrown away and then poisoned so that the starving people could not eat it. Rose of Sharon is not the first person to lose a child in this way. The camp manager and Mrs. Sundry both warn Rose of Sharon, in their own ways, of how other women recently had stillbirths due to malnourishment. Now, Uncle John is sending the corpse of this baby down in order to make a powerful statement about the way our capitalist society abuses, neglects, and kills us all. all of this happens because the banks stole the land from these farming families. As sad as that is, it seems as though the farmers are, in a way, reaping what they have sown. The farmers often brag about how their families have owned the land for generations now, and they take pride in how their grandfathers had murdered the Native Americans for it. We Americans live on stolen land. There's definitely a level of hypocrisy at play here. On a lighter note, the interchapters, and by that I mean the mostly odd chapters which adopt a broader perspective beyond that of the Joad family, are rather unique. And I am really on the fence as to how I feel about them. On the one hand, I do admire this unique decision. I believe that the most brilliant quotes from this novel appear within the interchapters. On the other hand, however, the heavy-handedness and didactic speech arise here too. I don't know if it necessarily would have been better, but I think that the story probably could have done without the odd interchapters. I first read The Grapes of Wrath when I was 16 years old. Back then, Tom was my favorite character. I liked the book, but I did not understand it as well as I do now. The biggest issue I have always held against this book is the controversial ending. When I was a kid, I hated it because it honestly grossed me out. As an adult, I dislike it because I do not believe it is a life-saving act. It was ultimately futile. I understand the significance to Rose of Sharon's character development, but I still do not think it was the right ending. Putting the ending aside, I enjoyed reading this book again, and I think that in some ways, this American classic remains deeply relevant to this day.